everybody. This is Crypto Rich working with you to get rich with crypto. And I'm having a conversation now with Andreas Fink. He's the CEO of Cajutel. Cajutel are a new cryptocurrency, CAG token, the CAG token. The ICO is ongoing currently, as you can see from here. It has another 24 days, 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 52 seconds and counting. First off, Andreas, thank you so much for making yourself available to have this conversation with me.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. And I understand you're in Switzerland right now. It's Friday, the 25th of August, 8 o'clock in the morning in the UK, and an hour later where you are. Andreas, do you want to start by just saying a little bit about your background and then go into telling us about Cajutel, what it is?
Yeah, well, my background is I studied electrical engineering at the ETH in Zurich and then went into software development, ended up in companies doing a lot of network infrastructure stuff. And in 1994, I actually started building up an internet provider in Switzerland. And at that time, the internet was very, very small. I basically wanted to have internet access for myself, and it was a little bit too expensive, so I was looking for friends to share the connection with me. And then, bang, the internet boom started, and we grew very quickly during that time. From an ISP with 4 modems in a bedroom to having an ISP having 14 points of presence all over the country, and thousands and thousands of customers. I don't even remember how many. In 99 around, we then sold the company to a pan-European ISP who wanted to have internet access all over Europe. That was called World Online. And they actually went to the stock market in 2000. So after that, I worked a little bit for Cisco Systems in the area of SS7 voice switching. And then I started again with another company called Global Networks, who did SMS services for operators and wholesale users. And out of this, we had a few other projects, such as we started a virtual operator, an MVNO, which was operating a network in Antarctica. We sold that one. And then we had a mobile network in Iceland, where we got the license in 2007. And we started building it up. We bought up a wireless ISP, also in Iceland, which were serving the rural areas. We renewed its infrastructure and then sold it again. And I'm still having a data center infrastructure company and a backbone company where we provide internet services to ISPs. And now with Cajutel, we're going into doing the same thing again, just 20 years later or so, in an area which basically does not have internet as we know it. There is internet there, but it's very, very slow. It's very, very expensive, especially for the population there. And it's the reason why only like less than 2% of the population have access to the internet today. So this is a big change because in Africa, most companies have some kind of internet. It's not always that fast. It's not always that cheap. But in those countries which we're focusing, it's extremely slow and extremely expensive, and it actually hinders the country from further development because you cannot trade, you cannot get access to information, and so on. So we're trying to change this by building an infrastructure from the ground up, from A to Z. So it's very, very greenfield, as you can imagine, because there's no infrastructure there which you can base your stuff on. So We have to build towers for distribution of radio signals. We have to lay fiber. We have to generate our own power, and we do this with solar panels, maybe a little bit of wind in some cases, because we don't want to put any fuel-based generators. And so you have to do everything yourself. So the disadvantage of this is it's very costly.
Yes.
But the advantage is you're not dependent on anyone. Nobody can just switch off your power because they don't like you, and you are independent, and you also make more profit out of it at the end. You just have to cash down more money.
Yes.
In the beginning.
Hence the ICO. Can I just ask? So thank you for that. So your background. So you've already set up a successful ISP in Switzerland, a mobile provider in Iceland, and you're now going to be setting up a high-speed broadband provider service in Guinea-Bissau. And is it going to be solar powered?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Because there is a power network there, but you cannot rely on it. So. You might have outages of power for an hour or so.
Yes.
It's getting better and better. And if you go to the countryside, there might be no power there. So what you have to do is you need big backup systems anyway to hold energy in batteries.
Yeah. And
if you have this, then you only have to add solar panels to feed it with energy when the sun is shining. And the sun shines a lot down there. It's actually very efficient.
Yes.
So... and the second thing is we don't need that much power to power every tower. And so we build totally independent systems to power the whole thing. And then, of course, you have the redundance, you have the battery backup. So when it rains, you still have power. And so this is
That's
rather unique.
That's extraordinary.
You wouldn't do that in Europe. Because you can just rely on the power grid, but there you cannot. So you have to do it yourself if you want to provide a good service.
Okay. And can I ask, why Guinea-Bissau? Why not Ghana or, I don't know, some other West African country or even other African country?
Well, I got into this area like in 2003. I had some contacts from the TV business who were rebroadcasting TV stations from satellites, and they were trying to get into voice over IP, so I got in touch with those companies and so on. And that was actually in Senegal, which is just north of Guinea-Bissau. And so that's how I got to know the region. They also gave out the first GSM license in 2003. Mm-hmm. Which I was also applying it, but then I saw that the political environment wasn't stable enough for this, and it was like costing too much. So as you can see, the development in those countries. I mean, 2003 there was like no mobile network. The only thing they had were 5,000 phone lines. Wow. 5,000 phone lines for a country of 1.7 million people. And the only connection was over satellite. So when you put this in perspective, and then 10 years later, everybody has a mobile phone. There's 1.7 million people, and there's 1.4 million phones in the country. But if you take away the babies who probably don't need a phone yet, then you come to the conclusion that like everybody has a mobile phone, and that in 10 years. So that's a very, very fast growth. And in Guinea, it's very similar, the situation. It's slightly better than in Guinea-Bissau. There's a little bit more infrastructure there in terms of telecoms, but still it's expensive. It's not really that reliable as it should be. And there's another 11 million people who want to have high-speed internet access.
Yes. And one of the
Sierra Leone is similar. Ghana, I just don't have any connections or don't know how this country works. So
sure. Okay. So it's primarily because you have some connections with Guinea-Bissau. Fair enough. And then my understanding in Africa generally and I think you touched upon it, is how much people use and rely on mobile phones. And I imagine there's a movement slowly towards smartphones, as there has been in Europe and in North America.
Yeah, more and more. I mean, there's a big difference in how people use the internet. In most African countries, it's primarily over mobile phones or maybe tablets or so. This is probably because that's the first device they can get into their hands.
Yeah.
And not everybody can buy an expensive laptop. But you see a lot of computers still there that people buy, from the used market from Europe, second generation stuff. So, you see internet cafes where people can go and get access to the internet and, pay by the minute when they're there.
Yeah.
That's also something you see in a lot of African countries. But you don't see this in Guinea-Bissau because you cannot just use the internet there. Because,
yes. No, I can get it. There's an advantage to using a smartphone, which is the cost of entry is much, much shorter. Plus also, if you have unreliable power, well, what you can do with your smartphone is charge your battery up while you do have power, so you can still use it when there's a power outage, which is not the same with a laptop or a desktop.
Yeah, well, the laptop still has a battery, but the desktop doesn't.
Yeah. And a mobile phone. Well, the cost of entry for a smartphone is a lot cheaper than a laptop, or can be, and they're a lot more mobile. Yeah. Okay, all right. And why have you decided to do it through an ICO and not through venture capital to raise the funds for this project?
There's a simple reason for that. Mm-hmm. First, we built a business plan. We did all the calculations from A to Z in a very detailed fashion. And then we were going to look for investors to invest in this project. And we had a really hard time finding them. And there's a variety of reasons for that. The venture capitals, they are usually too greedy. They want a lot of percent of the company, and because they're primarily there to make a lot of money. The investors, we didn't find the right type of investors, because a lot of investors we ended up talking to, they had no clue what Africa is all about. And you have to understand the market a bit to really evaluate the risks and the chances of such projects. And if you just go and buy some data from the internet from analyst companies, then those data are usually 5 to 10 years old and are totally outdated, because there has been a lot of change in the last 5 to 10 years. And so it's even difficult to get reliable data on those changes. You actually have to be on the ground. And there's not many people who are in those countries and understand the mechanics of it. So for us, it was like the problem of finding the right people who are, willing to put down large chunks of money for such a project. So the idea was then to say, well, what about if we get a lot of small people who just say, well, I'm going to risk $100 or $1,000 or so, because they are more risk-friendly in some terms, even though I don't think the project is more risky than, building other projects in other countries. But when people can actually read our documentation of what we're trying to do, what the situation is, what the risks are, and so on, they're more likely to understand what we're trying to achieve. And it's easier to, get people to risk $100 than to find one investor risking $10 million. So it's something we try. And what, of course, we do with our token is we use the token as a share.
Yes,
which is, I think, the fairest way of doing this.
Yes, I can see you on the website here, 10,000 tokens, and it says /shares. So this is not like, I suppose, how I understand most ICOs, where a company's raising money, uh, that you can, that the token holders are considered shareholders. So why have you done it that way, and how will that work?
Well, if you look at other ICOs, you're basically buying a token which gives you, which is entitles you to some part of some revenue which you might have somewhere down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the reality of the past, we had this kind of systems before. And when they built the railways across the states, they were going out and said nobody has enough money to build a railway from A to Z themselves. So they said, well, we're going to spread the risk by having lots of people putting money into it, and we give every people a share out of the profits. And that's what a shareholder is. He puts money into the company, he risks his money, and he hopes that this business is going well, and he gets a piece of a cake, depending on how much money he has put in at the end. So the shareholding infrastructure is the infrastructure which is there since many, many years to allow people who risk their money to get a piece of the cake of the profits. So why reinventing the wheel when you go on an ICO and give out tokens by putting up some really strange constructions in some cases where you are profiting on some of the profits but not on others, and you just make the thing whole very complex. I mean, the American companies, they often do this, so they are not being considered as selling shares, because then they have to do a lot of filing with the SEC and so on. Well, that doesn't apply for us because we're not an American company.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's the fairest thing just to say, whatever this company does, if this company is doing very, very well and is sitting on a lot of cash, then the company can pay a lot of dividends. And it should do that because the guys who put the money in the first place, they risked their money, and they should be entitled to get the profits out of the project. So I think it's just the fairest way to share the profit.
Okay, great, and thank you. I have no objections to that, although I don't have any shares as yet. I haven't bought any tokens. I haven't registered, and I may, after this interview. But that'll be up to me. And a reminder to all the viewers that whether I do or not, please do your own due diligence, and don't invest any more than you're willing to lose, because you're responsible for your financial well-being. And I'm not a financial advisor. Don't know if I mentioned it to you, Andreas, but my background is actually in child protection social work. And one of the things that appeals to me about this project is that you are working in a part of the world that doesn't have the resources. There's I suppose like an egalitarian aspect to this that I like. So thank you for that. And I just want to go back to the tokens as shares. So what could somebody who's a token holder, what can they expect, assuming that the project is successful?
Well, that's a different question. I mean, there's many aspects into this.
Mm-hmm.
If we follow our business plan, which is an Excel sheet, which is published also, where you see how much we're spending every month, how many towers we build, how many employees we're going to have, and so on. If we're going to follow this business plan, we end up like in year number 6, we have a figure there that the company would be sitting on $151 million in cash in the bank, and it has an EBITDA of $68 million. Now, if you take those figures and you compare them to what other telecom companies in this space are being valued at the stock market,
mm-hmm.
then you see that, for example, AT&T has a ratio of about 8 times the EBITDA which the company is considered worth. In some other cases, it's 15 times up to 20 times. It depends a little bit on what the company is doing. But the infrastructure-based companies who build up infrastructure and then run it over a long time to make profits out of it by providing service over this infrastructure, they run in this range of like 8 to 20 times the EBITDA. So you could say that if you buy the token and you use it, and in year 6 you sell it, then you might get, $500, $1,000 for the token, depending on how the market is going to look like. It also depends on how well do we achieve those figures. And actually, we have estimated that we are reaching 14% of the population in 6 years. And if you look at the GSM, what happened there, that they went from 0 to 100% in 10 years. It might be that we even have double the amount of subscribers by that time. We don't know.
Yeah.
But that's actually one of the risk factors I see, that we have to grow faster than we can. So it's different to say what the token will be worth at that time. But even if you just hold the token, in year 6, we're sitting on $150 million, and we don't need that much money. So we could easily pay dividends out of the profits. So just by buying the token and sitting on the token, you would earn profits every year. You wouldn't earn profits in year 1, 2, and 3 probably, or maybe starting in year 3, because the cash which comes into the company, we have to reuse it to build more infrastructure, to grow. Yeah. But this growth is going to decline once we have more or less the whole country covered. So we don't need to grow that fast anymore. We still have to, fix things and improve capacity in areas and so on. But the big growth is in the first 3 years. So after 3 years, the company is in a position to start paying dividends, and the dividends, of course, depend on how much, how well we are doing, and so it's like a normal share as well.
Sure.
The token is not making any difference. So what we do is, when it's time to pay dividend, we just pay the dividend to the smart contract, and the smart contract will figure out who has which token at what moment, and allocates the dividend to those smart contract owners, which then can claim the dividend and get ethers back.
Great. So the dividend will be paid in ether, and clearly what you're saying, this is a long-term play. So it's not something that people should invest in with, okay, I'm going to flip this in a few weeks' time or a few months' time. Now, I'm thinking of it's like buying Bitcoin. If I'd have bought Bitcoin 6 years ago and not 4 years ago, life would have looked very, very different. If I'd have spent the same amount of money. So this is a buy and hold.
It's still okay today.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
I mean, it is a long-term project. It's a long-term solid return.
Yeah.
But of course, the hype with the ICOs is there. You don't know what happens, just at the ending of the ICO or so. It might go that the price goes through the roof because everybody wants to participate. Yeah. You never know. But then you can also assume that if the hype is over, then the values come back down to realistic values.
Yes.
So you might be able to profit of some short-term hype. I don't know. But some other projects in this space, they only live off the hype. So they go up and then they crash down to zero. And in our case, there's always a value behind the token, because the value of the company is the value of its assets, the value of the customer base, and so on. And this is always there. So it would never just go to zero, because even if we do really, really bad and we have to close down, then the bankruptcy officer would just sell all the assets, and then there's money for the shareholders.
Yeah.
So the risk of going really to zero is like almost impossible.
Yes.
Which is a different scenario than in like pure software idea cases.
Yeah, no, because here there's a physical infrastructure, there's the potential customer base, there's the opportunity, and which is the expansion of broadband in a part of the world where there isn't high-speed broadband. It hasn't penetrated yet.
Exactly, and that's one of the big differentiators. It's like would you buy a share of America Online in 1994? Today you probably would, because. But in 1994, nobody had a clue on where the hell the internet is going.
Yeah.
And this is a rare thing, because if you look at the map, like in all countries of the world, at least like 40% or so have access to the internet. And there's only very, very few countries where there's almost nothing.
Yes.
And some countries have nothing because there's wars.
Yes.
Well, we're not going to go to those countries. And Guinea-Bissau is one of those countries which got out of their wars, which have a very stable government now. And there's even investment guarantees by the World Bank. So let's say we build this thing up and the World Bank guarantees our infrastructure. And, there's going to be another civil war and destroys everything. Then the World Bank would actually pay us the money we put into this project, including the potential profits which we would have had.
Okay, very good. I've just pulled up a map of Guinea-Bissau so people can see, and you'll be able to see that as well. And I've just got a couple of questions. I mean, I thought of more talking to you, Andres, so thank you so much for this again. So, is Guinea-Bissau a stable democracy? What if that changes? Because it is a part of the world which historically has undergone a lot of turbulence. Liberia, I don't know what the state in Liberia is right now, but it's not been great.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there has been political changes in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, it used to be a colony of the Portuguese, and they kicked out the Portuguese in the 70s. I can't remember exactly. I was in 75, 76 around. And then you had a lot of warlords from different regions of the country, which then were starting to fight against each other to figure out who is now going to be the big boss of Guinea-Bissau. So that was ongoing for quite a few years. And that was part of the problem why a lot of business were just like skipping Guinea-Bissau. Mm-hmm. And but this has changed a lot in the last 10 years because a stable government has now been established. They were under the control of the World Bank. They were like not allowed to give state guarantees and things like that for many years, which was one of the conditions they put up to help them. And they succeeded with the goals the World Bank was setting, and they have a very good democracy now. I mean, the right. guys they have voted in, they have elected into the presidency is a previous accountant, and you can actually, when you're talking to those people there, you can actually see that their goal is not to get as much power as they can. Their goal is actually to rebuild the country. And they're inviting investors to come to the country. They're doing everything possible that people come to the country and help them to rebuild the country. And there has been fantastic things already happening, where they collaborate with external investors to do certain things. And for example, 10 years ago, if you wanted to create a company, the paperwork would take you like 6 months to do the company. When I went there, we created the company in 24 hours, which means you go, you sign the statutes, you get it stamped, you get a bank account opened, you pay in the capital, you get the trademark registered. All this we did in 24 hours. And that's like a big change from 6 months.
That is extraordinary.
That actually has been implemented that way because they say, well, if we want to attract people to do business here, we have to make it easy. And it actually works.
Okay. So that means so that even then that becomes an even greater opportunity because they have this stable society, stable democracy.